quick introduction to myself. What is the point of AI if you can't lose the grey hair and about 188 pounds in the process? So you may as well take advantage of it because my profile picture is terrible. So my name is Nigel Garner. I'm the head of product and technology here at Nimble. I have worked in pretty much every sector going across the various different pieces, 12 years in finance, EdTech, a couple of years in the NHS doing various different bits. But one of the things that's relevant to today, so in 2020, I started doing a federated machine learning and ML ops pipeline project for the NHS, which was one of the first projects of its kind in the UK. We took data from 10 NHS trusts, we standardized it. For anyone who works in the NHS, you know with the fact they have 6 different variants of gender, that is a very difficult thing to do, and ran a privacy-preserving federated machine learning approach across the top of that, and then took that to roll it out into clinical care in a couple of trusts with a view of basically, the first project was, as someone gets out of a CAT scanner before they leave the room, there should be an indication as whether they're going to suffer from a stroke. Right, that kind of fast through, with a view of then extending out the different models that run on top of it, looking at triple-negative breast cancer, that kind of space and arena from there, bringing in multimodal data, genomics, all the various different pieces. That project went open source and got published by the NHS under Project Monai, Monai Deploy. I'm very proud of that work. We're working with NVIDIA around what does the AI center, AI hospital of the future look like, AI-centered, AI-first approaches to all that kind of stuff. That posed a whole load of questions and challenges, and some of that is what we're going to talk through today. So why are we talking about AI again? Everyone's talking around it. It's all over the place. Everyone says that AI is new. It's not. AI has been around since the 50s. It's been around in various different forms. What's changed about AI is it has become accessible. That's the key differentiator around it. It's easy to use now. It's much more accessible to get access to. The left-hand picture from 2014 took months and months of a research project to create those blurry faces on the left-hand side. The one on the right is about 3 minutes on an online portal. Right? Much easier to access, much more accessible to anyone. You don't particularly need anyone. I think as part of it, there's this new phrase been come up around, who's heard of prompt engineering as an engineering discipline and prompt science as a science? I think even our MD, Chris, managed to learn it in about, was it half a day as a science? Well done. But that's the kind of point, right? It's become accessible. It's not particularly, it has evolved, it has changed, but the big barrier is not, you don't need such complicated specialist resource to be able to access it. Pretty much anyone now can access and engage with AI and turn it into a meaningful use. Yes, the internet has done what it's always done. If you believe the press, I think there's one particular quote on here that it is an extinction-level event equivalent to nuclear war. That's pretty dramatic. And that is a vision that's been perpetuated out. It is in all the mainstream media. It's all over the place. You see organizations responding to that. We're doing quite a lot of work in the EdTech sector at the minute with organizations understanding the implications of AI on EdTech. Different sectors or different examples from the same sector from the higher education that came out with and their stance on it. Bournemouth University, ban it all. We cannot use this at all. This is evil, can't go anywhere around it. Lincoln University, let's stop and think about this. Where is it appropriate? When can we use it? When can we not use it? What's our actual stance and differentiator here? How can we actually use this to advantage and just acknowledge the fact that it is going to get used whether we want it to or not? It may as well be trying to ban mobile phones from the campus. It's not going to happen. And this is something we're seeing a lot. Different organizations within different sectors are taking a very different approach to this and responding to it very differently. One of the interesting things that came out last month from the University of Florida's science, they did a little experiment with this nuclear apocalypse technology, and they simply asked ChatGPT to take a look at a news article, and off the back of that news article, was it going to have a positive or a negative effect on the company share price? Nothing more. And then they traded off the back of it. So if it said it was going to have a good effect, they bought it. If it was going to have a bad effect, they sold it. It made a 500% return on their investment just from asking that simple question of a chat technology, right? It's crazy. But before everyone rushes home and does that and then blames me for any losses they've got through, I will point out that ChatGPT was trained up until, was it Q3 2021, and therefore all the data in it is out of date since then. So I wouldn't bother trading on it right now. But the impact is the same, right? That is simple analysis of a simple tool on that. has got the opportunity to completely transform the finance sector and how it approaches it and what that looks like. Yes, you could treat that as advice in a regulated industry, which is a different story, but they were able to do it, and it's a great little story as around how you can actually access this technology and use it for good in terms of delivering the benefit. This is backed by Goldman Sachs, who, the article from that, they're not presenting doom and gloom, nuclear apocalypse. What they're actually talking around is the ability that this delivers and what the opportunity is if you adopt AI and you take it forward. Another quick hands up. Who's struggled to recruit in the last 3 or 4 years for roles that they have in an organization? Right. Now imagine if you had all those roles filled. And that's what they're discussing, right? If you no longer have the shortages, and it's not about replacing humans in the store, in the kind of the organization. It's not around sacking whole loads of staff. It's around actually bridging the gap in the digital skills gap that you have at the minute. What happens if you fill those roles? Right? What can your organization do? How can you drive growth in the organization? How can you deliver better value over a period of time? That is the opportunity. Same with the Harvard Business Review. Same sort of response from them. And this article is a little bit older, but it's the same point. It's around amplifying the creative strengths. It's around heightening creativity and decision making. It's not about replacing the humans. It's about actually empowering them to do work smarter, work better, and make better decisions off the back of it, rather than trying to replace lots and lots of people at the organization. That is why, as we're working with a number of organizations now to start creating AI strategies alongside the other core strategies of the organization. Everyone's got a digital strategy, I hope, having gone through since 2016, the sort of digital transformation is part of that. There's a lot of corporate social responsibility strategies out there now, people doing that kind of work. AI fits in between the middle of those. It does touch on a data strategy as well. It's got to go part of it. But the simple thing is you can't treat it as in isolation as well. You've got to consider it as part of the digital journeys that you're doing and CSR. The opportunity to, if anyone's in here has targeted carbon footprints, for example, and they're suddenly deploying AI into the organization, you need to stop and think about it, right? What's the opportunity? What does it look like? How do we actually do that responsibly and sensibly? Where we're working with organizations, then we're breaking that down into 3 key areas. So in terms of how do you actually look at the opportunity for the organization, what that means, and something, a summary of what we did for an EdTech organization recently, it applies everywhere, which is why I've included it here. It's around, firstly, the proposition. How can you enable it for the clients, right? What does that mean? Secondly, what does it mean for your operational teams? It's not just a client-facing gimmick or free tool or something on those kind of lines. How can you leverage it internally to work faster and work sharper as part of it? Real-world example of that, which kind of goes against what I said earlier, but Octopus CEO, if anyone saw those new articles, in terms of responding to customer inquiries via email and using AI to auto-generate the responses and going back, achieved a higher satisfaction rate and actually allowed them to move 250 people to other roles in the organization because that was responding faster. It could do that role, it could do it really well, and it gave them the opportunity to take those people and redeploy them and drive value elsewhere. AI is targeting, though, the higher skill sets of the organization. It's not just the call center workers, those kind of pieces. There's a reason why there's a lot of talk right now around legal tech, like virtual lawyers, like finance as part of that, developers, targeting AI code generation off the back of that as well. It's targeting those because they're high value skills, therefore the high impact on organizational value off the back of it as well. But what is the opportunity? In terms of the great one, in every large organization I've worked with, we've struggled to get hold of the compliance team. So certainly in finance when I was working in that sort of space. But what if you've got a virtual finance, so a compliance assistant sat there where you can ask questions of it, you can get indicative guidance where it's then signed off by a physical human at the end of it. There's a lot of opportunity for that sort of interactivity. Train it on the knowledge of those teams, build it out, and then allow them to do the overall sign-off and cover that, rather than it just being the actual mundane basic questions going back and forth. It's lots of different spaces. And technological, developer assistance, engineer smarter, engineer faster as part of that, but then also the acceleration, right? What are you doing in terms of automating processes, requiring less operational teams to be able to do that, to get rid of some of the donkey work that goes through the noddy tasks, and use the automation as part of that instead to create actions. So what have we found in terms of executing an AI strategy? What are the key kind of areas that we're looking at as part of that? Well, there's a bunch of common questions to start with. And these are ones we get asked a lot of, and there isn't answers to all of them at this point in time, being honest, which is why the strategy is important. We need the strategy in place to be able to mitigate and to guard against some of this. The simple question on that top one: who owns the copyright? The copyright and IP of AI-generated code? Legally, in this country at this point in time, it's a bit grey. There is a method of addressing that, of approaching it, where you can put yourself in a strong position going forward with it. But there are questions in the sector. There's no point hiding away from that. But there are answers that you can work with and approaches you can take to make sure that you can implement AI both ethically and consciously and on a safe or on a managed business risk basis going forward. There are also a bunch of common pitfalls on this. The biggest ones are at the top of here. It's a case of people implement AI because they think they should be. They don't stop to ask the use cases: what am I doing it for? What am I trying to achieve by this? What is my use case? What am I trying to get out the back of this at the same time? They don't properly look at the infrastructure and data investment that's required as part of it as well, those kind of pieces. And then once they've got a little pilot, it's so kind of niched within the organization, they struggle to take that initial pilot, no matter how brilliant it is, and actually turn it into a production system. How do you actually take and actually realize the value off the back of it as well? That's a common challenge that we see around people and common pitfalls. I'm curious again, because I've been talking way too long already. Do any of those resonate with people? Just hands up if people have seen those. That's a good number. I like that. Thank you. So our stance to this and the way we're approaching it and the way that I think gives us a good solid basis and foundation off which we can be working. These are the areas that I think everyone needs to be thinking about in order to create an ethical and actually implement an ethical AI strategy going forward. You need to understand your AI principles, write them down. We'll talk about that later, and we're going to go through each one of these quickly in a minute. Establish your governance. I am a techie by heart. I used to like writing lines of code. Governance to me used to be a swear word. That is probably one of the most important things on here right now, right? Actually putting the box and the wrapper around it to make sure that you can do it and you can do it safely and appropriately. I see too many project managers in the back there nodding for my liking. Define the use cases, design the infrastructure, actively address the technical team and skills requirements of this, because you've got to do it with the people. You can't just use technology. People process technology, the basis of most of what we do, and understand the data as well. So what does all that mean? First one I'm going to cover is around understanding those use cases, right? Why are you doing it as an organization? If you don't understand this, and you haven't got a North Star around it, then you're going to struggle to kind of work it out and understand where you're going and successfully implement and traverse something through. It's around what is the competitive advantage you're trying to achieve around it? Is that the reason why you're doing it? What are you doing? What are the disruptors in the industry doing? What are your competition doing as part of that as well? What is the impact of the business model? Not just about putting some technology in there, but how does it actually change your fundamental business model as part of it as well? It's not just a little bolt-on piece on the side, potentially. You could be making significant changes to what your business looks like and how you're addressing it going forward. Areas of application around it. So we see a lot around sort of product or service-centric solutions, creating new AI, augmenting existing processes. And then there's that sort of more product-centric, actually something new coming out there that's actually a new proposition out to market, something very different from what you're doing as the rest of it. Establishing the governance. Governance is, in this context and the legal position that we find ourselves in right now, is around two kind of key parts around this. So it's around the risk management strategy. As an organization, what level of risk are you willing to take? What's your approach to it? There's three common ones, so two common ones and an evolving one that's in there around that. Human in the loop. Is the human watching the AI at all times? Are they actively involved in the decision-making process? What does that kind of look like? Human out of the loop, where the AI just runs, right? And kind of happens at the end of it, and it's free to make decisions and make recommendations off the back of it. Then human over the loop, which is one that isn't as commonly talked about, but is evolving very quickly. And what if you let the AI kind of do its piece and then let the human check it, as the human manages the AI from that sort of respect? And that is something that we're seeing far more common. It's a way of balancing, taking the advantage of the AI, but then laying on the governance and the checks and mitigating the risk as part of it as well. The second one is around establishing an ethical advisory board. Something I never thought I would find myself saying in my life, but You don't have to go whole hog with these kind of things, right? There's a spectrum. There's ways and means of finding different levels of this. The QR code I can share afterwards for people, but it's a great article by Stanford and the US Center for AI Governance on how to establish one in the various different levels and what does that look like. It's a long read. It does require a glass of wine. I will admit that one quite freely. But the key points from it are relevant and entirely appropriate in terms of if you want to scale it back and be able to deliver, set up a lightweight or a highly complex ethical board, then the principles and practices are all there in the document. It's quite good for doing it. You're doing that as the governance and oversight, not to stifle innovation, but just to make sure people are having the right conversations, they're openly discussing things, what the discussions they're having are insightful, they're intelligent, and they're actually influential as well. So it doesn't mean that people can just go off and run and do things. Everything that is being done and is being actioned has been discussed. It can be quickly and lightweight, but then it's moving forward off the back of it and everyone understands what it looks like. The reason that's important is because the different legislative approaches that are being taken at the minute. So the UK is vastly behind in this area. The EU, or the Far East, is doing the best. They're quite advanced in establishing this legislation, followed by the EU, US, and then the UK is following. The UK is taking a very different approach because it is going with what the government is calling an innovation-led strategy, which means they've defined 5 principles and then they've passed it to each of the regulators to work out what that means for each sector. So every sector in the UK could have a different implementation of AI governance and strategy according to that, which is going to make it more than a little bit challenging. There is no coincidence that OpenAI, ChatGPT's owners, opened in London or was it yesterday, I think it was, in terms of their first international office, is because we are very legislative light and they don't want us asking certain questions. Whereas the EU, on the other hand, has created quite a comprehensive framework for what that means, what the governance is going to look like, what kind of approach we take to that. How do you balance that uncertain position, right? Well, this is the key for me. Write down the AI principles. Understand what it means to your business and in the context of the business, not just some abstract words on a page, but in accordance to your business models and a business model and aligned to your company, what are your AI principles as part of that? They don't have to be complicated, 8 or 9 items on a page. And there's great kind of 4 pillars to base them off around that sort of fairness, transparency, human-centered, privacy, and security. But in the legal uncertainty that exists, this is what a lot of organizations are doing to try and position themselves to going forward so they can explain the approaches they've taken, where they are and why they're doing it. And it's why when you go to the Google page, there's a kind of a big full-page spread on their responsible AI and their AI principles and how they implement it and everything else like that. Is to try and mitigate that uncertainty. It's to try and address those questions and concerns going forward. But another great article out by Stanford, who are doing some brilliant work at the minute, but this is a model of each of the core AI providers at the minute mapped against the pending EU legislation, their compliance. It's about, well, the best one is 36 out of 48 scored points-wise. Averaging, the big tech providers are running about half compliant to the new EU law and legislation at this point in time. There's still a lot of work to be done in this space. But if you establish those AI principles, you start to understand the basics and start having the advisory boards, then you can explain your position of where you are and why you're doing and why you're taking a stance. You can be open and transparent around it all. And that is the key kind of foundation off which you can then go and build and start implementing an AI strategy. Next one. Team and skills. Skills of, so one of the clients we're working with in the EdTech space is doing a lot around the pedagogical approach to 21st century skills, metacognition, learning, all this kind of stuff. And it's around teaching collaboration and creativity and communication. That is completely, and they're doing this to primary school kids, but that's now been blown out of the water by the implementation of AI in this sort of space, right? Because the core skills that you need right now to be able to address and engage with this are critical thinking and that communication and collaboration. Skills that are only just starting to develop in primary school and really embed in the primary school education. You need the critical thinking to be able to tell whether the AI is telling the truth, right? It's not perfect. It makes mistakes. But how can you actually assess that and be able to understand it and be able to critically think? I love the phrase that's been coined around AI hallucinating. I think it's a nice one. The other one around the collaboration and communication, you're suddenly engaging with technology that, in a way that you've not engaged before. In a natural language model, you've been able to have a chat with it, but it's a different kind of chat than you'd used to chatting to a human. So how do you do that? People are having to adapt the communication skills and how they collaborate and engage with it. And that's why I reckon those two are the kind of the key most skills in terms of personal development and training of the teams at this point in time, of the soft skills, because that's how they're going to need to be able to engage with this technology going forward. And it's very easy to miss that when we're starting to roll out new products, new propositions, embed it in processes. I think that's what we need. The irony is you can actually use AI to train them as well. And I love the, it just makes me smile on that one. But the application of AI in that sort of training and development space is can actually identify the skills gap. It can be skills-led training. You can do personalized training plans relatively easy for people to actually understand where they are, what skills they have, how you then develop and grow them through onto that. So AI both creates the problem and solves it at the same time, which is an interesting juxtaposition. In terms of designing the infrastructure, it was one of the common pitfalls that we started with at the beginning around people not understanding the use cases. So either people spend an absolute fortune on infrastructure that they don't need and is over-engineered, and that infrastructure is then quickly evolving and rapidly changing, and in 18 months it's out of date, and therefore they've got to continue to remake the investment, or they're under-speccing it and not understanding the complexity of the project or what they're trying to achieve with it because they don't understand the use cases, and therefore they end up throttling, they don't get the performance and ability to deliver and roll it out they expected to, and they miss the value delivery as a result. It is an important one. It comes back to that first point around understand the use cases. Off the back of that, you can appropriately design. I mean, as a rule of thumb, everyone is screaming and shouting about GPUs, and GPUs are heavily required for the training and development, but there's not many people in this room will probably end up training and developing models. What a lot of people end up running is inference, right? You'll actually execute a model that somebody else has trained because that's the value, right? That's what everyone's running around doing at the minute, is trying to build a whole load of models, and then they will become commoditized items you take off the shelf, you put into an ML ops pipeline and roll out, and that's where you started to run inference over training. There is a big difference in the architectures, the chip architectures, and what it means. Specifically, and going back to that sort of carbon footprint territory, which is an area that I'm very interested in. But if you quote NVIDIA, who might be slightly biased, and I'll put my hand up to that at this kind of particular point, they reckon they use 42% less energy to run on a GPU than a CPU. So if you have other commitments around the organization in terms of carbon footprint, in terms of energy consumption, those kind of points, there's a lot of factors that go into actually designing an infrastructure appropriately and making sure that it's fit for purpose for the use cases and isn't a significant financial burden that's kind of get in place and to go through. Cloud, yes, you can use this in the cloud. You can also run it on the edge or on-prem. Right? There is valid use cases for both. Don't assume that you have to go to cloud with everything, and just because your data's not in the cloud, that you can't leverage this technology or anything else like that. There are ways and means of solving all those problems. And it depends a lot upon what you're trying to do, upon where the compute needs to take place, how close to the data it is, etc. It is possible and entirely appropriate in certain use cases to use on-premise solutions. It's also entirely possible and sensible to use cloud-based solutions. Both are getting significant investment from their various rival parties. So don't jump to a conclusion that to do AI, I need to be in the cloud, and therefore I need to move every system to it. But if you are in the cloud, then you can more rapidly trial and prototype and engage and get some of those advantages you get from being there. Yes, Dan, I'm conscious of the time, so I'll last two slides. Understanding the data. I mean, data is fundamental to the application of AI. You need very large data sets to train AI. You need good quality data to run inference. You don't necessarily need large data sets to run inference of it. You can run inference off a very small piece of data that's flowing through a system, as long as it's been appropriately trained and you understand the conditions and nature of that training as part of it as well. So understanding the data of the organization, I mean, if you have a data strategy within the organization, most people probably should. But if you have one, do you understand it? If not, what key areas of it should you be taking away and starting to apply to this? Do you understand who owns the data in the organization? If you're going to start running inference and AI across data sets, who is the owner of that data, right? Who do you need to be talking to with? Who do you need to start to engaging with? What does it look like? What's the governance of it? What's the quality of it? How do you kind of work with that? And then also, Don't detach AI from any data maturity processes, data maturity improvements that an organization is going through, right? These two can work very hand in hand. If you're working through any of the data maturity models and trying to improve that and trying to become more decision-led, data-led and data-aware, then this can actually be an enabler for that. It doesn't have to be something that gets put to one side or stopped or blocked by everything else. There's lots of opportunities around there as well. Last slide. Just a little bit of a thought to leave with as well. If you do all of that and you go through and set up those key kind of points and steps around it, then what is the opportunity for the organization? Ties back to that use case. What kind of advantage can you gain? What operational efficiency can you take? But more importantly, what would happen to your business if your competitors did that? Right? If you just stayed still and didn't adopt this and didn't approach it, and your competition did, what is the impact on the business? And that's the key kind of question and thought that I just want to leave everyone with as well from that.